U.S. President Joe Biden and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol have unveiled a new plan to boost their response to rising nuclear threats from North Korea. The deal includes plans to dock a U.S. nuclear submarine in South Korea for the first time in 40 years. The agreement is being called the Washington Declaration. Under this, there will be a U.S.-South Korea consultative group. This will give Seoul more insight into America's plans to deter and respond to any possible nuclear incident in the region. Washington would also deploy a nuclear ballistic submarine to South Korea, the first such submarine, as we mentioned, in 40 years.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. What a beautiful day to invite great friends back to the White House. Welcome to the White House. Today we celebrate the ironclad alliance, the shared vision of our future, and the deep friendship that unites the Republic of Korea and the United States.
Biden further warned that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's regime would be finished if he were to launch a nuclear attack on the United States or its allies.
The national anthem of the United States.
Nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies or partisans or partners is unacceptable and will result in the end of whatever regime were to take such an action.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, who is on a 6-day visit to the United States, said that peace with North Korea would come through strength and vowed that any response to a nuclear attack would include U.S. atomic weapons. Yoon further said that the new commitment by the alliance includes plans for the establishment of a nuclear consultative group and improved sharing of information on nuclear and strategic weapons operation plans.
한미 양국의 이번에
Korea and the US, based on its Washington Declaration, our two countries have agreed to strengthen extended deterrence, and the implementation level is different from the past. First of all, we have an NCG, Nuclear Consultative Group, that has been launched and that will implement discussions and actions, and we will hold regular meetings and consultations under NCG.
U.S. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden also welcomed the South Korean president and his wife, Kim Kyun-hee, to the White House for a state dinner. The state visit comes as the U.S. and South Korea mark the 70th year of their country's alliance, which began at the end of the Korean War, where Washington helped Seoul defend itself from Pyongyang. Well, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is set to make an address to the U.S. Congress in a matter of hours. He will be the first South Korean president in 10 years to do so. VOA's Jessica Stone joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Jessica, welcome back. What do we expect the South Korean president to say during this address?
Good to see you. Well, it's an interesting path to get to this place, Susan. So let me set the scene for you a little bit here. President Yoon was invited to do this address just a few weeks ago in person when he met with members of Congress here on Capitol Hill, and he was invited by a bipartisan group. So there's very much a bipartisan spirit around listening to his speech in just about an hour and a half. He was invited to share his vision for the future of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, and also outline the challenges that lie ahead. He is the first Korean leader in about 10 years to give such a speech, and we don't yet know whether he will give his remarks in English. Only 4 out of 6 of the last Korean presidents to give such addresses did so in English, but he's expected to underscore the same themes we've seen throughout this visit: solidarity on nuclear deterrence, on cybersecurity, on space even, as well as solidarity on pursuing more supply chain resilience and semiconductor chip manufacturing coordination. But yes, the threat of a nuclear North Korea has really cast a shadow over this visit. And we know from reporting in South Korea, that this is a main concern for the South Koreans themselves, far more than the threat of an assertive China or rising tensions in the region over the South China Sea or other such issues. So he also needs to address in his speech in just a couple of hours now the South Korean domestic audience and the opportunities that lie ahead within this alliance to address their concerns. Susan?
Yeah, absolutely. President Yoon also held a day of meetings with President Biden on Wednesday. That would be yesterday. So what are the major outcomes and what are the implications for the Asia Pacific ultimately?
Well, the first headline that Washingtonians are certainly hearing plenty about this morning is that President Yoon can sing quite well, actually. He gave an impromptu performance at last night's state dinner in which President Biden said, "I didn't even know you could sing." So he's quite a crooner. He did get a chance to join in some of the American Broadway tunes that were performed for the state dinner. But on a more serious note, I mentioned, you know, how much the nuclear North Korea, its capabilities now to not only send missiles to South Korea, but to the U.S. mainland is really shaping this visit. And the main announcement that came out of this visit, as you alluded to earlier, is this extended nuclear deterrence that the U.S. is offering. And what that amounts to is not only this consultative group that you mentioned, that they will be more information sharing between the parties, but a routine, albeit temporary, nuclear submarine presence in the region. And that just means there's going to be more U.S. nuclear assets in the region at a time when we have an increasingly assertive China, also increasing its nuclear capabilities, as well as agreements with Australia and Japan to increase their nuclear sub capabilities as well. Susan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will admit, I didn't have the South Korean president singing American Pie on my bingo card, but the crowd was very happy with his choice of song and how well he knew the lyrics. So, but moving on, you know, the unspoken second tier reason for increased nuclear cooperation between the U.S. and South Korea is obviously countering China, which is building up its own nuclear arsenal. How does Wednesday's agreement between Seoul and Washington fit into that picture, Jessica?
Well, we've seen with each visit of American officials to the region an increased emphasis on rebuilding alliances in the region. And this is one more pillar of that effort by the U.S. government. You know, the U.S. military says China has more than 400 nuclear warheads, that it has nuclear capable strategic bombers and ballistic missile submarines, and that China's military is shifting from a defensive position to an offensive position. Whether that is related to Taiwan or just self-protection, we don't have all the answers there, but we can see from the outside, according to U.S. military sources, that that's what's going on. And we're also seeing both China and Russia position themselves to use nuclear weapons in theater, as we say. We saw that in the Ukraine war, the threat of Russia using nuclear weapons, just quote unquote in theater, smaller nuclear weapons. We see China moving in a direction as well where it can deploy those types of weapons in theater. U.S. President Joe Biden is not only rebuilding the alliance with South Korea's new president, he's also encouraging South Korea to strengthen its ties with Japan. There's been a long-standing unpleasant relationship between those two countries, so there's a lot of work there to do. But the U.S., South Korea, and Japanese trilateral relationship is also really strengthening. And the U.S., as I mentioned, is strengthening ties with Australia and Japan and the U.K. over that AUKUS agreement that would see U.S. and British technology go to the Australians for nuclear-powered submarines to strengthen their presence in the region. So we are really seeing this sort of NATO of the Indo-Pacific approach by the Biden White House in response to China's assertiveness in the region. Now, the key challenge here for Washington is to really not only place those assets in the region, but also to make clear to Pyongyang and to Beijing that Washington is willing to use them if needed. Susan?
VOA's Jessica Stone joining us live from Washington, D.C. Jessica, thank you so much. for all of that.
You bet.
Okay, here's Elizabeth Loris, an adjunct fellow at the Pacific Forum, as she talks about how North Korea is famous for its unprecedented military drills. And with the military drills happening between the U.S. and South Korea, it has become a cause for concern, to say the least, for the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un.
The Kim regime, it's actually a dynasty over there. It's now into its third generation, and Kim is now grooming his daughter for the fourth generation. It is perpetually perturbed by, number one, the division of the Korean peninsula between the communist north and the non-communist south, but also the presence of U.S. troops and then the further military presence of the U.S. in South Korea, and of course, 70 years of a mutual defensive alliance between the United States and South Korea. And so the North is going to continue to be belligerent in its behavior, provoking a response from South Korea and the United States, then which further motivates North Korea. And so what's most important to the Kim regime is staying in power. And that is why the regime has nuclear weapons. It sees what happens when you give up nuclear weapons or you give up nuclear weapons programs. You get taken over or you get defeated. And so he has the weapons to protect his regime. It would be absolute lunacy to use those weapons because, as President Biden said, then the retaliation would be so unbelievably catastrophic that not only would it take down the regime, but it would take down the entire leadership of that country.